Hello student and welcome back to class. Here in this SDL video we'll talk about what we're trying to make. Well, I said action RPG, but people got bored with that idea, so let's just make something fun instead. So let's work on making a top-down shooter with action RPG elements. I get bored too. I know you get bored too. You played all the other games. Let's play something that I wanted. I was a big fan of Marvel games and X-Men and things, so I sat around and I tried to conceptualize what we were trying to make this semester. So what we'll be working on is a game I call X-Men Slash and Burn, and this is 2025. I'm working on this stuff for a while, so don't worry about the graphics. I made them myself, a lot of them, because I had some free time. But anyway, in the game, we'll talk about a state machine. You'll need a state machine to transition between, in C++ and other languages, you have a state machine transition between menu types in a game project. So, for your first, well, after there's some menus and stuff, I went out around and found some sound effects and things. I was also working on a Dragon Ball Z game that people wasn't a big fan of Dragon Ball Z, so we'll come back to it. We'll talk about what we did in that project for another assignment later. But anyway, right back at the game project here, in your state machine, one of your pages will say, you'll have a new game. You'll be able to load game states. I want to work on because it's Simple Direct Media that has multiplayer game support. So we'll have to have the multiplayer. We'll talk about setting up client server applications, how to toggle option menus, credits. I put here, this is not for sale. We're just making this as a fan game project. I already did the legal things. We won't talk about where they got the images from and stuff, because some of this stuff is copyrighted and things. So we won't. It's not for sale. So for academic, educational purposes, moving right along. You also need to be able to terminate the game when you click the button. So we'll talk about how to press buttons on the screen when you click on to transition between state menus. Also, another thing we'll talk about, since we have support with this with Simple Direct Media Layer now, we'll talk about how to. This is just a screenshot. We haven't gotten down to this part yet, but we'll talk about how to incorporate. Is you can actually drill out text on the screen. You can actually rescale the images here I got for this game. There's a cycle. There's some artifacts here. I'm not sure what the artifacts came from, but we'll fix that later. But I try to go over the X-Men. I have a lot more X-Men characters, and then we can make them unlockables and things. And those things you'll have in your menus for your games. You'll have, usually people want to play, if you're playing local co-op or something, you want to be able to pick some people, right? More than one player. They'll have a name, or if it's player one, it corresponds. You can write font, and then using the true text font like TTF library, you can put your people, and then they animate and things. As other X-Men characters that you're familiar with. We can do some other thing. I didn't align these correctly, but this is an example. You'll have to be able to transition between menus. Another thing that Simple Direct Media Layer is good for is you can, for instancing, for controlling the. It won't look like this when the game's up and running, but like if we were playing with Magneto or something, you're fighting a bunch of different types of Sentinels. You might want to do something different, a little better with using algorithms for sorting your enemies. So a lot of times here I have a lot of different Sentinels and things here. They're chasing Magneto down and whatever. I didn't render a tile map for this, but you can animate things. But what you'll notice here is a lot of the players here, a lot of enemies here are overlapping each other, walking on top of each other, which is just a cute and nice fun thing. But you need to be need a nice way to sort the index of the players based on their height, so I can tell who's behind who and or limit the number of instances for objects, or limit the number of interactions so you can reduce slowdown for your game project here. We won't say what was going on in this part of the game, but if I rendered a player and all these guys were supposed to come to this particular position on the screen, all these guys would they would bump. There's a chance that when they attack, they could hurt each other, other things. So you might want to limit the number of instances, or at least make a collision detection so they're not walking on top of each other, by giving them a rectangle. So here he's walking on his shoulder, and these guys, some things are sorted right and other things aren't. I made a loading screen because I had free time. But anyway, we're going to try to you need a decent state machine, because we maybe have a training area. There's maybe a single player campaign. You want to be able to select players. just to make something. This is for fun, so I'm just making something to have all the things that people would expect to see in class. At least, hopefully, you'll come back to class, and people don't like to come back to class. They drop all the time. So hey, we're just trying to do something different this year. Well, anyway, I made some icons here. We'll talk about animations. This is the Sentinel talking. I'm not sure if I can, I just by transitioning. I drew master mold. I tried to make some load screen materials, and then also for your sample to break media layer, you need to regulate the frames per second, or otherwise the screen will flicker. And then you can add other things like support of shaders and stuff. You can toggle between full screen and off screen. That you can add depending on the device. If you're trying to port this out to mobile, it may not have the central processor on the mobile phone may not have support for using like shaders and debris and things, but other phones may. So you may I probably need more menus. You may need some kind of advanced option setting to actually get for increasing the frames. So usually you want to lock the frame rate in based on the display device. And then another thing I noticed that people do that seems to be barbaric and silly is that if you have a really high frame rate on a device, like if you have your frame rate is really bound to the amount of refresh rate of your monitor. So if you got 400 frames a second, your monitor won't refresh at 400 frames a second. There's no reason to run your CPU that high or that hot, because you'll just blow your PC out, and you'll just be using your device up. If you porting it over to like a 40K device, if your screen resolution on your television is really big, then that high refresh rate will work, because you're rendering on a 30-inch screen on your PC or something, 32-inch, and then you upgrade to a television. That high frame rate unlocked is great, because you'll be able to, because it's just filling the screen, and it may, when it comes to that device, at least for now, based on this hardware architecture, it's slow. It'll be normal speed. If you notice where if you play PlayStation games, there was some slowdown and stuff. It's just just people poor memory management, but we'll get around to that when we get around to programming. All right, so let's look at some other things for your folders. When you parent your graphical resources, you might want to break it up. Like I have downloadable resources somewhere in my repositories, but this is not a tentative, absolute thing for this game. So what I did was, I thought I was making a Blade game at first, so I went through and I drew a bunch of animations for different Blade style characters. You remember the Reapers from the Blade 2 movie? I drew some of those. I got Ghost Rider, and then I drew Deadpool with some of his attack animations, because usually your players, yeah. Let's talk about using, let's use somebody a little bit brighter. Let's go back to Deadpool. Anyway, in your game, you'll usually have a state where the character is idle, and then there'll be an animation walking state. There'll be an attacking state, or if he attacked or something, or jumped. I didn't do a lot of special animation. I just rotated the sprite. But then usually you'll have some kind of where you're getting hit, and then you'll have a state of when the player's dead. So there's just idle state, attacking state, hit, and usually dead. And some people had a jumping animation and stuff. So I was setting this up for a controller, because I was trying to make it give everyone the same number of animations. So anyway, your main character I'll play around with is Blade. So I drew Blade with the coat on, with his trench coat on, with the just from the comic book version of him, without the things, the other shirt, and then without his bulletproof vest on. And I drew him with the bulletproof vest on, and just to give him a different set of animations and things. So I was trying to give everybody about the same outline, because I started off drawing X-Men and stuff first. Like I drew Wolverine, and I try to give it's not the best artwork, but it just matches the game. So I started drawing the club guys and the dance, and we'll talk about using shaders and stuff in the simple direct media layer. I drew tried to be the women and female vampires, and then I drew up, I think I got a Whistler or somebody, so I'm not sure where I put Whistler, and a few other characters and stuff that was for the game. And also I have other sprites that I started working on for, I'm not sure if they're not in this folder. I don't think we're going to do any mods this semester. But anyway, for simplicity's sake, for your program, and usually you just have a folder called resources, and then you'll have a project there. You import the project file things into your project directory. I notice it seems a little bit distracting, because you jump around a little bit and just you're not doing everything all at one time. But you don't want to spend extra time on resources. So anyway, if you head over to my website and you click on that project resources, I've made some resources like for this game. Like I drew all the, not sure if you can even see that, but I drew X-Men and things, and I drew enemies and stuff, and I didn't do them the right way, but I have to cut them out later. But just as we go through coding and some of the direct meal, we'll talk about. I drew some Batman characters. I got a little distracted on that, and I drew Sentinels and this Spider-Man, and there's the animations for Spider-Man and Venom and things there. I drew all the other characters, and I drew some Dragon Ball Z guys. That was last year or whatever year it was, and people they weren't game with that. They're a big fan of anime. So, but anyway, back to the coding thing. All right, so also sound effects. I try to go through and I cut out some sound effects I found online for Sentinel sounds, and I had some music. I'm not sure if you can even hear this sound when I play it. I'm not sure if that's going to load. Yeah, anyway, we'll play around with this. All right, so we're making a. Oh yeah, let's talk about that while we're here. I don't want to waste your time. So to make maps, there's a tool called Tiled online, and Tiled outputs files and JSON files. So we'll have to do a little something different. It has support for scripting events, like a lot of the games you've played out there. If you've seen Shovel Knights, you use the Tiled editor. There's a lot of good. If your artwork's up to par, you can actually sell your games, and usually what you do is you create a press kit, and you create a website, and then you use it to publish on Steam, or you put a game on it. You only need like $100, and once you got good artwork and good box art and things, you can use the same engine to make other games. The Axum Verge, if you've played Axum Verge 2, is out now, or for at least for Nintendo Switch, and I'm not sure if it's on the PlayStation Network and things. Use the simple direct media layer. All these tools, a lot of these, because this map editor is pretty versatile. There's two types of graphics that we'll talk about. This is the game design course. There's pre-rendered graphics, like here. I'm not sure what name this game is, but these graphics here, even though it's isometric, there's certain parts of this game world that are pre-rendered. Even though it's 3D and whatnot, there's certain part like this isometric perspective shows you that there was a tile map, but certain parts of the game, like that skeleton and this trailer, that was pre-rendered, and a lot of things that they cut out and put in, like these HUD elements. A lot of times are kind of hard to cut up. Like your background would be pre-rendered graphics. So that's you store usually if you're trying to save memory for projects. A lot of 2D games have as much space storage as the 3D games now, because of the way they've managed the textures, and that's probably not a smart way to do things. But we'll talk about that later. But anyway, you can do other things like setting rules for polygons and things using tiles. Other tools people use out here for game development. If you're making 3D models, Blender's out. Available at blender.org. It's a free project. A lot of things, tools we'll use for this course will be free. We'll talk about 3D development in simple direct media layers. We'll get around to it for a later project or whatnot. Maybe if we have time for it, not this semester, but we'll talk about it then. But it has support for shaders. It makes movies. They've used it for some independent films. It has modelers. I think I've used it for a project for. Which the person got a fellowship for. We got a fellowship for that, working on that. Just at least the graphics were up to the part where they liked it enough to Well, it was better than everybody else's project, so we won't go into that project for today. Um, but anyway, if we're making a game in the simple direct media, there's a few tools you out here that you'll want to use. I'm not sure if I put it in the examples, or I keep saying the same things over and over again. I think I say the same thing every year. But you'll need a tile map editor if you want to make pre-rendered sprites. So if you're making a real-time strategy game, like a StarCraft style strategy game, you could probably use Blender. There's a script online I think you can use to change the orthographic perspective, so that it's just Python. The Blender will load Python scripts, so you can change the render to match a certain perspective when you load it up. So since we talked a little bit about what we're working on, we're trying to make an X-Men game. I guess for right now, we're not really talking about the game itself. We're going to talk about what we're trying to do this semester. So what we're going to do this semester, because I'm trying to compile this stuff for a book. So we'll talk about some of the things that we'll need to actually have for your projects. We'll talk about, at least through the progression of this, we'll talk about how to load sound. All right, and we'll talk about how to move the player in the different directions inside the window. We'll talk about deleting objects in the simple direct media layer, which is really important for you. This is an example, as I've done this for a while. So we'll talk about deleting objects in memory. We'll talk about rotating sprites using the simple direct media layer. We'll talk about webcam support when you learn to load objects in and out from the webcam. We'll talk about the different geometric primitives available to the simple direct media layer. At least some examples that'll get you some things. We'll talk about how to render text on the screen. We'll talk about what we talked about before about loading the state machines. We'll talk about instancing objects. We'll talk about the heads-up display or the HUD elements, like how to display health icons and things like that over the screen, which may be useful to you. We'll talk about creating clickable buttons on the screen, as I showed you a minute ago when we talked about the start screen. It's not really the splash screen, but the start screen in the game. We'll talk about how to drag and drop objects onto the screen. Okay. We'll talk about collision detection features for the game parts, like if you want the player to stay inside the bounds of the screen, or like if you have a different type of level where we just want the bottom part of the player to be bound inside the screens. We don't want the person, we just, if you're inside a room, or you're on side of a dock or of a building, I just want the legs to stay in. I don't want, I want to make the perception that the player's still inside the room, and he just did, just because the rect was around the feet of the player. But we'll talk about toggling the screen aspects, so like you can change the size of the screen and the size of those fonts. We'll talk about simple pathfinding techniques, making the player move towards the player in the game. That's important for you. We'll talk about, just as a quick overview, we'll talk about how to get the gravity in the game, make the player jump and stay on the ground. We'll talk about shooting projectiles from the player. Player shoots projectiles will have to be absorbed by an object pool. We'll have to talk about that. And we'll talk about rendering things from a tile map. I've talked a bit about pre-rendered graphics. That's just images that are bigger than, a lot of the sprites are composite sprites. Like you see Mario, he's a composite sprite. He's made of more than one sprite. And we'll talk about parallax scrolling. If you move the character back and forth, the screen should scroll. That'll be useful to you more than just beyond this course or beyond this one project. We'll talk about each component as a module, since it'll be a lot better this way for you to learn and use it retroactively. My research area is in STEM retention strategy, so we'll just talk about each individual piece of the code, and we'll spend some time on that till you get it down. Because I'm not sure how much time you have to learn, and the people don't want to be distracted. So, all right, so we'll talk about, like, if you click the button, I want the player to in animation to rotate toward the direction of the area that he's going toward. Like, if you play Diablo, we're making an action RPG, so you click the mouse here, and the player goes, this square goes toward the circle. I click the mouse there. I need the player's animation to rotate toward the where the mouse clicked, and then like if it was attacking an enemy, same thing. I need the player to stuff. I'm playing with a sorcerer. I need the sorcerer to shoot. When I click the attack button, it's not a move action. It's you can also do inside a state machine. I need the player to shoot at the target and not go toward it. So, okay. All right, we'll talk about rendering backgrounds that you'll need to have for your game. We'll talk about drawing one sprite and animating it off a tile sheet. All right, so last night I had some free time, so I drew up some tile maps using the tool. I'm at pixelapp.com. I drew a lot of things that made out of composite sprites, but we're going to make the level out of this. I have a tree. There's a top part of the tree, which I can make the extended larger for the walls. I drew some blocks. This is probably not the best graphics. This is just rushed. I drew up a target that the players, once we have the player on screen, Blade or whoever, the Deadpool, Wolverine, or whoever, once they shoot the target, or whoever can shoot a Cyclops or Gambit, or you know the X-Men, you know what they look like. We don't worry about all of them. Everybody, just about everybody, all the girls can shoot or fly, and all the guys walk. So walls and things made out of the level. You can make the level out of these 3x4, and the sprite editor, you can do a lot of other things with it, but I just made some quick stuff to just for the class when we get around to doing the platform or whatever we're working on for this particular project. So that's probably a lot to swallow for the first day of learning the simple direct media layer. I'm trying to work on a book for the simple direct media layer, so we're going to go over all these things, at least to be compiled for the book. So if you're watching this video, hopefully you'll support the book and look at the other things. I've been working on this for a while, and by the time I got to the part when we were working on the next part for the book, they updated it again, and they kept updating it. So I've been working on this for a while, so we'll talk about what we try to do for this. So I found some, when we play audio clips and stuff, I went out and found a duck quacking for the sound effects, and then I found bells ringing for the music, just to test out for when we use the simple direct media layer. So hopefully in the next videos we'll go through each one of these topics, and hopefully that some of these topics will be useful to you when you learn the simple direct media layer. And I will see you in the next video.